All right, we are live.
Well, good. All three people who might tune in to
Doesn't
see
matter.
live.
Doesn't matter. It's got to start somewhere. 840 at Talk 107.3 FM, WBRP. Mornings with Brian Haldane, rolling right along. All right, back to the insurance front. Want to welcome back to the show Jay Robicheaux from Coastal Louisiana Insurance. How are you, brother?
Man, I am as good as can be expected. I got to tell you, it's been a really interesting political session, and as somebody who's not in politics professionally, it's been really eye-opening, Brian.
Okay, but at the same time, though, you have been diving in. In fact, you were at the legislature, was it yesterday?
I was.
You sat in on June A. I've never witnessed a public execution before, but that's what that committee does. What was your experience like yesterday?
It was very interesting and enlightening, Brian. One of the things that I had heard about, learned about in civics class, but didn't realize is that at the end of the day, these legislatures put a lot of effort into even getting a bill before a committee, and within 5 minutes, something that they've worked all session on gets axed, and that work may or may not resurrect itself, but oftentimes just goes right down the tubes.
What bills were you there to see specifically? I mean, I'm not asking for bill numbers, and that's only nerds like me remember that. But what were you on the lookout for?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, Brian. That's one thing I was speaking with somebody about the other day. Politicians don't think like normal people do all the time. We think about what does the bill do. They see so many of these things that all they're really worried about is a number. And that being said, the bill that I was most disappointed to see get shot down was the loser pays bill yesterday.
Was that Blake Miguez's?
That was Blake Miguez's bill, and I'm hopeful that it'll resurrect itself between now and the end of the session.
Okay, so not to shoot you down right there, but Blake Miguez is on the Senate side, and you were in Senate committee. So that bill is not going to make it. If it comes back up again, it's got to clear over to the House side as well. I don't think it's got enough time.
You know, Brian, I'll be candid. I 100% agree with you. I try to be a glass half full guy, and I look at a lot of the legislation that did pass, a lot of the legislation that the governor supported, and it was good legislation.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute, because we just had the governor on like half an hour ago. This is, per his words, I have my notes, hang on. The largest tort reform in Louisiana history is what went through, or what has so far gone through this session. As someone who works in the insurance business, do you agree with that takeaway?
Brian, I think a giant asterisk could be put on that particular statement.
Okay, is that asterisk the bill in particular that allegedly puts all the power in Tim Temple's hands?
You know, Brian, I wasn't here to cast stones, but I was very disappointed. For those who are bill number wonks, I believe that was House Bill 148.
184.
184.
You had the right three numbers. See?
Well, like I said, I'm not a professional politician. I am a professional insurance agent. And so I can only speak from my perspective and from my clients' experiences, Brian. And that being said, I think that while we have passed a lot of substantive reform, that this bill really does make a lot of carriers take pause about coming into the state of Louisiana because of the way that some of the language was put into the final bill.
The devil's always in the details. If 184 is going to be a hindrance, what's going to be a help? Modified comparative fault, that made its way through. I feel like that's going to be a big one.
I feel like it could be something very substantive, Brian. Let me make an analogy, though, for you, if I may, talking about modified comparative fault. So just to kind of read the language from the modified comparative fault, if I can find it on my notes, and if not, I'll sum it up in lay people's terms. Modified comparative fault basically says that if somebody's at least 51% to blame for an accident, that they can't sue the party that's in the minority for causing their issues and injuries.
If the accident were mostly your fault, you can't sue, yes.
And you know what, I find that interesting, and I'll go back very quickly, segue to House Bill 184, and what the bill essentially says is that the commissioner is the one who has the power to make decisions about, you know, if the insurance company is mainly at fault for their rates being what they are or not. I don't agree that that's the way things should be handled. But more importantly, if we're using that same analogy, who's most at fault in this? I think most Louisiana consumers would agree that the tort situation in Louisiana is at least 51% to blame.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going now. I'm caught up to speed now to see where you're going.
For our insurance crisis.
Yeah.
And I feel like that really is what needed a lot more attention still than it received this session.
I agree with that, and medical transparency especially. If that either Representative Glorioso's bill or Senator Reese's bill can find their way through in these last 2 weeks, it's going to be a game changer when it comes to rate. Now, speaking of rate, boots on the ground. You see change in the legislative session. Representative Egan out of Covington said, and the governor kind of reiterated a little while ago, I'm looking at 12 to 18 months, possibly 2 years before we start to see what happens in the session affect us when it comes to our premiums. What kind of time frame would you put on, like, let's say the bills that got passed between last year and this year, when you combine those bills together, when you combine the new laws together, what kind of timeline are we looking at to see actual change when it comes to my premiums?
Brian, that's a great question. And the reality of it is, like anything else that's worth doing, it takes time. One of the things that the governor alluded to was that they implemented a lot of the changes that were done in a study in 2020. That was 5 years ago. We're just getting around to making those changes. So I don't think we can be in a hurry to see substantive rate change. Frankly, I'm not sure we did enough to really drive rates lower. Though I hope that I'm wrong on that. I hope that we do see some rate changes happen significantly. But one of the things that I'll point out is education was a crisis 10 to 15 years ago in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. There are those who might even argue that it still is, but you can look at the test scores and see that a lot of the changes that we were forced to make, not that we chose to make to be proactive, but because things were so bad we had to do something, mm-hmm. a decade and a half later are really just starting to pay dividends.
Yeah. Yes. Those changes plus a lot more once Cade Brumley took office, he has so accelerated things along the way. And I would make the comparison that Tim Temple in his post and Cade Brumley in his post, they're both the accelerants that we need.
I would agree. I would put one caveat in that it seems to me that Cade has the full support of the governor.
Okay. Well, also, he doesn't have to answer to companies who decide whether or not they want to play in our sandbox. That's an added part to this equation that if I have beef with House Bill 184, if I have beef with saying that Tim Temple can dictate rate, no. In fact, I got to pull that soundbite from the governor where he said the insurance companies decide. Because they're the ones ultimately that do decide. And if you put too much power in one man's hands, you run the risk of running them off to where we don't even have them as a carrier anymore. Or we set up something to where companies end up insolvent. I tell you what, you were supposed to be out of here by 8:50, and it's almost 8:50 right now. Can I get you to hang around until the end of the show?
Brian, I would be glad to.
Awesome.
I want to sell some insurance, but more importantly, I think I want to make it easier for the citizens of Louisiana to buy insurance, and so this is an important topic.
All right, so crumpling up the outside end, we're not going to do that today. We're going to continue this conversation. Jay Robicheaux is in studio with us from Coastal Louisiana Insurance, kind of a boots-on-the-ground perspective of what's going on in the legislative session. On air, we got Your Money Now. We got a check of traffic. We'll come back and continue this conversation next. On Facebook Live, stick around because we're going to keep on moving as the break wears on. All right, so we are still on Facebook Live on Talk and on yours.
All right, well, super.
So, yeah.
You know, I'll make sure not to cuss anybody out. I do want to kind of bring up an anecdote. You know this, but a lot of folks may not know that me and the governor grew up in an area that were about 10 minutes away from each other in rural St. Martin Parish.
Really?
We did.
Well, I knew you were from St. Martin. I didn't realize it. By the way, you know, like the governor has been the governor for a little over a year. When you cross over to St. Martin Parish on I-10, it says home of Governor Jeff Landry. The governors get on that quick, man. They get on that quick.
Well, look, there's a lot you can say about Jeff, both good and bad, but I think mainly good. And one of the things that he's very, very good at is that he is a very good self-promoter, as are most people who become governor in the state of Louisiana.
That is correct. If you are going to run for political office, you have to be good at that.
Well, and especially in this state where it's the little populist gestures that go a long, long way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just a kind of quick anecdote about Jeff Landry. My dad actually met Jeff about 40-ish years ago. He used to build swimming pools for a living. He built the Landry family swimming pool when Jeff was a kid, and he still owes Jeff's father for a political favor. he ran over a servitude line, and so he could have been out several $1,000s. Just so happens that Jeff's dad was an architect and was able to look at the plans and realize that the way they were drawn up, that by about 4 feet, the parish had mismarked the power lines on the servitude, and thus, because of that, he didn't have to come out of pocket. So look, I appreciate the Landry family and what they've done for my family for 40 plus years.
See, that's the Louisiana stuff right there.
Well, it is. And look, I love the state. It is what it is, though. And there are some things that I think need to change, and some things that make us unique and make us awesome. And sometimes that fine line gets very, very blurry.
Yeah. Yeah. Give me 1 second here. Responding to a text while I'm...
Well, and Brian, there's one thing I'd like to mention about that 148. That's just a real quick, but I think important point, is that the language around the bill can get the insurance commissioner not only to subjectively reduce a rate hike, but that he can force insurance companies to redistribute excessive profits from the company if they believe that they've overcharged.
Yes, which is based off of the way that that Tim Temple evaluates rates right now. That's not going to happen because it's all actual, it's all numerical, and nothing subjective about it. Everything he does is based off of what the numbers tell him to do. It's not like he has a gut feeling from one day to the next.
Well, the reality of it is the insurance business only works based on the law of large numbers. You know, being a finance guy, having a master's in finance, I'm by no means a numbers wonk, but I've studied enough about how numbers work that we know statistically you have to have a large enough pool to get a real sample size. And the reality of it is, you know, insurance companies are dealing with such a runway of long-term financial decisions that they have to deal with, that they're making decisions now for 5 and 10 years down the road. And what kind of decisions are they making for that 5 and 10 years down the road? What does that look like, you know, for when our kids start driving? And it's the same thing for anything, education, crime, poverty, all these things.
Well, and one of the things I didn't like about what the governor had to say was he was talking about what rates were before 2008 and whatnot, right? And how rates have gone up since then when you've taken the power out of the insurance commissioner's hands, blah, blah, blah. There's a part of that equation that he completely overlooked, and that's Jim Donelon got reelected 3 times on the campaign slogan of "I'm not in jail." Robert Woolley, Jim Brown, those guys served time. We had extenuating circumstances that caused us to do what we had to do, and oh, by the way, that was all the while. I don't want to vilify attorneys because they're playing by the rules that were set up to establish for them. But if you are allowed to write the rules to any game you're going to play, you're going to win that game because you're the one who wrote the rules.
Well, look, if Shaq was playing on an 8-foot goal, just think about how many points he was scoring.
Right. It's exactly right. Or
if you have a regular source of income, you can apply for a loan of up to $5,000 in minutes, and your cash can hit your bank account as soon as the next day.
Always having a moving target, like no matter what, always having a moving target that the insurance company and the policy holder, that moving target that we have to keep up with is. I don't know. It just, to me, it makes it untenable.
Well, and here's an interesting thing to consider, Brian. Insurance companies, do you know where they generate the majority of their profits from?
Where?
Investment returns. So they take all of these dollars that they have set aside to pay premiums, and they don't just sit in a bucket. They take them and they invest them. So when interest rates doubled over the last couple of years, that means they earned double on their investments, which means that, of course, they're going to be more profitable, even if you remove all the other variables.
The governor said that insurance companies make more money in Louisiana than they do other states. Is that accurate?
That is completely inaccurate.
I thought so.
Well, Brian, and may they have had a very successful year in Louisiana? Yes. But there's a concept in finance called beta, okay, which basically looks at how one investment performs versus the market. And so if you look at the beta of a oil and gas stock, right, that's not necessarily going to follow the market, but it's going to maybe give you some insight into the market. That's how I feel insurance is.
I'm going to pick it back up here.
Sure. And I could really nerd out on the finance side of this, but the reality of it is money gets made a lot of different ways.
Yeah. All right, got about 3.5 minutes left here. Mornings with Brian Haldane rolling right along. I do need to remind you, if you don't have your lunch plans yet, P.F. Chang's is here for you. The black pepper chicken is unbelievable. Lunch special starting at $13.99 every day. Dinner special starting at $16.99 every night. And, oh, by the way, happy hour specials every day of the week. The bar is so underrated. I love the food so much that I never talk about the bar. It is fantastic. So if you're stopping off after work, you need to pop in for a quick drink, they've got you covered. And, oh, by the way, dinner special starting at $16.99. You can't go wrong. You know where to find them. Off of Corporate Boulevard in Town Center. Look for the giant golden horse. It is P.F. Chang's. We got Jay Robicheaux in with us from Coastal Louisiana Insurance. Jay, I wanted to keep you for a couple of extra minutes just to kind of continue the conversation that we were having as we were heading into break. The overall outlook here, and you were talking about the compare and contrast, like between Department of Education and the progress we're seeing now versus Department of Insurance and the progress we may start to see soon. I think one of the bigger takeaways is the consistency with which we're paying attention. As someone who works in the industry, does something that little as, oh my goodness, they're paying attention, is that a motivator? Is that something very, very real that can translate to, if we've got the legislature's attention, can we get the industry's attention?
You know, Brian, that's a very great and very fair question. The way I look at it is like this. Politicians are political animals. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they can't please everybody, and nothing that they do should be taken personally.
Oh, of course not.
Okay? But this one feels personal to me because my livelihood depends on making sure that citizens of Louisiana can find readily available, fairly priced insurance. And so I think the important thing to note that I point out quite frequently is I don't work for the insurance companies. Mm-hmm. I work for the clients, the people who are buying insurance policy. And it's my job to say, yeah, all rates in Louisiana suck. Maybe we can find you one that sucks less. And that's really a difficult spot to be in. I feel like we're put between a rock and a hard place because many people don't understand that, frankly, we need the carriers more than they need us. Louisiana, as profitable as the governor may seem to think that it is, makes up less than 2% of the revenue for all of the national companies who do business here. Right. Most companies can skip 2% of revenue for a lot of headache, and they will.
Insignificant is a bad spot to be. As not being on somebody's radar is a bad spot to be. Being able to be, if we could just be dumped and they don't miss a beat, that's a tough spot to be in. 30 seconds left. Bottom line it for us. You were trying to be optimistic, glass half full earlier, but your quick takeaway on the way out of here.
Well, Brian, once again, I'm really, really hoping that we stop hearing a lot of legislative speak and a lot of real people speak about what we need to do to get across the finish line. One of the things that I think we ought to pay attention to, like you mentioned, is that under the current law, jurors hear the total amount that's billed, not how much it actually costs, and that's how settlements get made.
And that's the medical transparency one that is going to be the bugaboo.
One last thing, Brian.
Quick.
I do know trial attorneys will not stop funding politicians. This will not happen, so pay attention.
Moon's next. I mean, going out with shots fired. All right, Facebook, we got to get out of here. We will see y'all tomorrow. We got Pennington in the house tomorrow. We got Lake Urgent Care hopping on board. And, oh, yes, Rocco. We'll see y'all then.
Well, I hope I wasn't too bashy.
Wait. You're not done yet.